Hi, BookTube, and welcome to a new video in which I shall mainly be talking about the last in Ali Smith's quartet called Summer, and I'm going to tack on a brief mini haul at the end of it because I'm only talking about one book this week, which is all I've completed. So we finally come to the end of the seasonal quartet, and I think in some ways the best of the four, and I would say actually there's been a progressive increase in the entertainment and quality of the four books, and I wonder if that's a measure of Smith, each book that Smith completes in the quartet focusing the ideas for the next one, so the books seem much sharper spring and summer, I felt. It's not a perfect book, it's the favourite of the four, as I say. I give this 4 stars, mainly on the strength of the first section of the 3 sections, where we have a 13-year-old boy called Robert and his sister, who's older. I'm not exactly sure how old she is, sort of 15, 16, whatever, called Sasha, and they are diametrically opposed in the sense of Sasha is an environmentalist, she befriends a homeless man, she writes to an immigrant who's basically interned in a centre, whereas Robert is a proto-sociopath, big admirer of Trump, Cummings and Boris, not as people but as arch manipulators. He appreciates their art of manipulation, and I say he's a sociopath because he doesn't play pranks as much as those sort of tortures and torments, particularly his sister. There's one particularly nasty scene where he glues an egg timer or an hourglass with superglue to his sister's hand, so that, to embody the pun, you've got time on your hands. So these are the 2 main characters that drive forward section 1, and I think they both represent the split down the middle of, not just in Britain but throughout the world, of the 2 camps of the I'm all right Jack, the rest of the world could go to hell, as to those who go, no, we reach out to our fellow man, and we all live or die by supporting each other, not just looking out to ourselves. Now on the surface that could be like really just sort of quite Ali Smith sort of talking at you, but it isn't. It's supremely well done in a literary fashion. So to give you an idea of that, the first chapter, or the first couple of pages, she's just listing all these things that we could be concerned about that have changed for the worse in the world. But most people's attitude seems to be so what, and it's almost a list. But that passes very quickly into Sasha's talking with her mother. Sasha has an essay from school on forgiveness. And what she'd really like to write is that to be in a position of forgiveness is a position of self-imposed moral superiority, that you have the power to forgive whoever you're forgiving. But she knows she can't write that because the English teacher will not approve of it and mark it down. So she's gone online, put in forgiveness quotes in the search engine and come up with a Hannah Arendt quote about how forgiveness is vital in order to, push back the course of remorseless history. Hannah Arendt, was using it in the context of the Holocaust. But the nature of the internet being what it is, Sasha doesn't know that it's Hannah Arendt. And her mother takes her to task over this, saying, it's not enough just to say it's a quote from the internet. You've got to know who said it, where they said it, in what context and everything. And they're having this back and forth argument about this. Sort of the mother, sort of as a sort of final gambit, says, well, what happens if something's attributed to you having said it when you never said it, but you still get all the backlash and all the hate online for it? And Sasha goes, well, if I know that I didn't say it, I feel fine about it, and I would forgive them. And it's a brilliant way to sort of to win the argument. So we've had all this play on the notion of forgiveness, different definitions of forgiveness, but actually wrapped up in the whole notion of authenticity, attribution, experts, knowledgeable people versus the whole anti-knowledge, sort of thing not trusting experts and not needing sources, and if it's online it must be true, and fake news, all of this. So it's very, very cleverly couched. And then it moves very quickly on to a discussion of the word mercy, which has, you know, similar sort of connotations to a discussion about forgiveness, except what Smith is so brilliant here is that mercy is the name of someone that Sasha's mother used to know when they were both actresses, or wannabe actresses, you know, struggling on the margins. And this woman has ended up in America and started a TV online ministry with the name Mercy in the title, and has rechristened herself and rebranded herself as Mercy as her name. So it's a completely corrupt word, a word empty of meaning, because her use of the word mercy is to just make money, is to get people calling in, pledging money to her ministry. And it's so brilliantly done. I was absolutely hooked and gripped by this brilliant mixture of politics, literary writing, and characterisation. You know. Then we can move on to Robert, the brother, and his sort of nasty little sort of tortures of his sister. He is obsessed with Einstein, because Einstein was this sort of fantastic brain, and, you know, he sort of has read everything about Einstein, has pictures of him up on his wall. He's obsessed with the fact that Einstein spent some time in Britain, and he wonders whether he ever came to Brighton, which is where Sasha and Robert live. And as I say, there's this, you know, sort of analysis from Robert representing that, you know, the people who would the equivalent of the people who would march with guns in Virginia, or who would go White Lives Matter. But he's you know, he's slightly different to that, because he believes in self and is only concerned with self. He likes manipulators of power, because that's what I think he himself would like to be. But he doesn't have any sort of ideology. He's a throwback to that "so what" opening, really. He's not a white supremacist. He says he's patriotic, but and yet Einstein is a Jewish immigrant that he's interested in. So yes, he's 13 years old, so he can have these sort of paradoxes because he hasn't quite grasped it. But I don't think it's that at all. I think he knows exactly what he's about. And it's a really interesting, frightening, you know, he's 13 years old and he's clearly a sociopath, frightening character. And then we have their mother, Grace, who's the sort of ex-actress, single parent now. And this is where the book, I think, unfortunately, can't keep up that fantastic intensity at the beginning. So there's a section where Grace, you know, they've all gone to Suffolk in a car with some other people in section 2, which I'll come to, because Grace wants to revisit a church where, when she was an actress and they were doing a performance in this town, there was lots of sort of intrigue and backstage gossip and all this sort of stuff, and she's sleeping with a male and a female member of the cast, but each don't know that she's with them, the other one. And to get away from it all, she goes for a walk and she ends up in this church in the countryside where this guy is restoring a pew, and they have this conversation, which is just very normal. It's, you know, there's none of the sort of obvious divisions that split us now. It's just completely normal human interaction. It's not sexual. It's just hanging out with a stranger and being able to communicate. And the guy lets her complete the work of restoration by doing the wood staining, so that what he's repaired now looks like the rest of, you know, age of the rest of the pew. So she's now gone back many years later to see if she can find the church, to bring back this memory, and the church is abandoned. It's behind it's been fenced off. She finds the tomb that they had a little picnic on, which had some verse on it, which struck her at the time. She takes a photo of it, but when she looks at it later, the words haven't come out clearly. I didn't see what the point of any of this was. It just, the whole stuff about the theatre troupe, you've seen done 100 times. So it didn't seem to, Grace didn't seem to add anything to the story. I was much more interested in the children. And the people who took them to Suffolk, and one of the reasons that Robert really wants to go is because Einstein spent time in Cromer, in Suffolk or Norfolk, wherever it is, and he wants that to be part of the little tour they're doing with these people. But the people that have taken them are Art and Charlotte, who are from, let me get this right, are from Winter, the novel Winter. And they sort of bump into Grace. They have an accidental meeting with Grace. And it's not really credible that they would offer to take Grace and her two kids up for a sort of, impromptu tour to Suffolk and Norfolk. But anyway, and Art and Charlotte were once partners. They ran what's called an Art in Nature blog, which is a bit of a sort of dilettante thing to do. And again, there's nothing really added by bringing them back here. From Winter, I feel. We get some COVID stuff, both that affect Sasha and affect Charlotte in particular. But again, because this book, I don't know exactly when it was published. If it was September, let's say it's published in August. That's literally 5 months after the lockdown and everything. Smith reproduces aspects of what we've all experienced, but doesn't have the distance and the time in putting it in here to reflect and draw out anything further from it of use and of value. So again, I felt that didn't really work. And also, Robert sort of falls in love instantly with Charlotte, and that sort of, and almost in an instant, rubs off all of his really rough burrs, so that it's not just what love, his eyes being open to the possibility of love and feeling for another person outside of himself. He actually seems to regress and become almost a different character in the final section. I just didn't believe he was the same character as I read, with all that hatred and intensity and boredom and ennui and anomie that's so brilliantly portrayed in the first section. By the third set, he's been sort of, denatured really, and I just thought that was inconsistent writing. So in between that section of the sort of the road trip and the first section, we get another set of characters are introduced. This was from Autumn. That book has two characters at the heart of it. Daniel Gluck, who in Autumn in 2016, when it's set, is 100 years old and in a coma. And Elizabeth, who visited him every day. She as a child, when they lived next door, Mr. Gluck often looked after her when her mother was off and about in the big city. And Elizabeth has such a formative relationship with Mr. Gluck that, when she comes back, when her own sort of adult relationship has failed, she comes back to live with her mother, discovers Mr. Gluck is in this coma. She goes and sits with him and reads to him, or just sits by his bedside and is reading her own books. And the whole point in Autumn was that she was the main focus, because Mr. Gluck's in a coma. Yes, he had these very interesting and strange, slightly surreal imagery, which I felt were sort of pathways to the gateway of death. But it's mainly about Elizabeth, because when she was a child, Mr. Gluck always asked her what she was reading, and they told stories to each other, and she learned how to form narratives and stuff. So her story is much more interesting. Here, the second section is about Mr. Gluck. And he's looking back when he and his father were interned during the Second World War on the Isle of Man as Germans, as potentially sort of, fifth colonists. So they were interned. And it's just not that interesting, because it's quite a sort of prosaic, telling of the story of internment, which again you've heard before. I think Smith's point is that, we the British have a history. I mean, we invented the concentration camp for a start in the Boer War. The initial experiences of the Germans who were rounded up and put in a transit camp before they went to the Isle of Man was that, this is only 2 notches down from the Nazi death camps, which, clearly isn't true. I know the point she's making is that we, the British, have behaved almost as badly, and we have this inherent racism. I get it, but I don't think it was well done. I don't think it was subtly done. There were points at which it got interesting, such as these camps were often in entertainment places such as horse racing stables or where circus animals were kept. So on the one hand, it's this sort of notion of levity and entertainment, be it a horse racing or a circus or whatever, but on the other hand, it's they are treated as animals. But you could have done that in a couple of pages, not the whole section. And as I say, I just didn't really get, Mr. Gluck is not as interesting a character as Elizabeth was, because he's not really facing any dilemmas. He's in an internment camp. He has his liberty restricted. And we get the view on his sister, who's remained in France and is sort of helping the resistance. But even her story I didn't find that interesting. So that whole second section didn't work for me, and really sort of a lot of the fury and the analysis and of the first section with the two children just didn't exist in the second part, which is really a disappointing drop-off, I felt. And again, just to give you, as you know, Ali Smith likes to bring in a female artist in virtually every novel she writes. And there are two here, and I think the contrast is very interesting. We revisit Barbara Hepworth, the sculptor, who sculpted, stones, sort of circles and spheres and things to represent a mother and a child, very much like Henry Moore did. And she first appeared in Winter. Here, Mr. Gluck owned Hepworth's statue, but someone had stolen the smaller pebble, the smaller stone, the child. And it is restored in the course of this novel. And it's a beautiful image of parents separated from children, being brought back, being reunited. It's fabulous. So that revisitation of a female artist, I thought, absolutely worked. We get introduced to a new one who was a documentary filmmaker, amongst other things, an Italian, called something like Mazzetti or something. But what Smith does is she basically describes scenes from this documentary film. And whereas the Hepworth she has formed a whole new metaphor of the child and the parent, the child and the mother being split apart and then brought back together. Here we're just getting scenes described to us, so we have no room for our own imaginations to be at work, because she hasn't worked the material, she's just reproducing the material. There's nowhere for the reader to go with it. We have to draw the conclusions that have been drawn for us in the way Smith retells the scene by scene. So that didn't work, and I think it's very symptomatic of when she's at her best and being metaphorical and being literary and being quite analytical through using metaphor, which is a really hard thing to pull off. Smith is almost untouchable, but at other times she's much more prosaic and she spoon feeds you what she wants to say politically, and there isn't that much analysis, and the metaphors either don't work or aren't there at that particular juncture. So a real mixed bag for me. Sections 2 and 3 I got very little out of, but section 1 was so good that I can forgive it and still give this 4 out of 5. And just thinking about the whole quartet as a whole, I said repeatedly after autumn and winter that I just didn't know where this was going and what my reaction was. And I was going to make spring a sort of, am I even going to continue with this or not? Spring was good enough that I did feel I wanted to get onto this. And I'm glad, because as I say, I felt it was the strongest, or at least the first third was. And I think over the 4 of them, each one has a fantastic relationship at the heart of them. Here it's the brother and the sister of Robert and Sasha. Incredible dynamics between the two of them. And as I say, in each of them, Elizabeth and Gluck in Autumn was a fabulous relationship. Paddy and the bloke Richard in Winter, an amazing relationship. But the point is, they're not consistent enough in that all the main relationships are not all up to that standard. So again, when she really zeroes in on writing relationships, she's fantastic. But there are too many other relationships that just don't work really. And you got that in this. You've got the improbable coming together Art and Charlotte suddenly picking up Grace and her children. I didn't buy that. You got the inconsistency of character of Robert in the last part of the book, where he seems a totally different boy from the sociopath in the first part, which I just think is inconsistent writing. As to the politics of this quartet, then, you know, it's in here about Brexit and about sort of British endemic racism and anti-migrant feeling that fed into Brexit, but they weren't the only reasons behind Brexit. So across the four, the analysis I don't think is particularly complete. I think it's quite sort of partial, which is fine, you know, it doesn't have to be anything more than that. But when the first two came out, they were touted very much as political post-Brexit novels, which they're not. Yeah, so a fantastic endeavour though, if you think about it. 4 novels in 4 years, each absolutely right up on you know, the events that were happening as she was writing it. But as I say, they didn't always work in and of themselves. Like the COVID thing here doesn't really work because she hasn't had the time and distance to reflect, to be able to actually add anything to the way we think about COVID. And I've you know, brave endeavour, brave undertaking to make it so contemporary, but equally severely limiting her abilities to really get drilled down into things that hadn't even fully played out yet. I mean, we still actually haven't left Europe. We're still arguing about it. You know, only this week the British government are talking about actually breaking the treaty that they signed with the EU. So it's very hard to put off sort of, you know, real wide-lensed analysis. But I salute her for trying, and I salute her for the endeavour. I would say that summer and spring were 4 stars, and autumn and winter were 3 stars. So that's a pretty good average, you know. There wasn't really a duff book among them. But I'm not sure I'm any of the wider as to what the whole endeavour was trying to achieve. What I most got out of them were the central relationships in each of the 4, some fabulous imagery, such as you know the Hepworth sculpture, but there was plenty of stuff that wasn't engaging as well. So you know, I'm pleased I stuck it out and read all 4. Summer for me was the best, but only the first third. I'm really not sure. I'll be very interested to know what other people feel about the whole endeavour of all 4 novels now that they're out, but also what they made of parts 2 and 3 of this. And okay, so on to a brief book haul, which I wasn't particularly planning on doing. Just these books happened to, from different sources, happened to arrive all together, and I think make quite an interesting selection. And at least 3 of them will be my next 3 reads. So about 3 years ago, I finished Franz Kafka's America, and in my sort of overview of Kafka said how sad I was because I've now read everything by Kafka, from all the short stories, Letter to His Father, the 3 novels. But I was told by Mitchell Axler that actually there was a new publication coming out this year of shorter writings of Franz Kafka, and a lot of these I think are literally sort of, you know, ideas and drafts and stuff for short stories. And I'm assuming that there's nothing that I've read in here. Oh, yeah, maybe there are. So the Great Wall of China is a short story in the collection of short stories that I've read, but maybe this is an earlier version of it. So you've got something here called The Bush. I mean, that's all it is. You know, and I don't know if that's a fragment or the complete, but I'm really looking forward to reading this. Slightly annoyingly, it doesn't appear to be listed on Goodreads, so if there happen to be any Goodreads librarians watching this video, will you please add this? It's called He, Shorter Writings of Franz Kafka. And usefully, being Kafka, it goes towards my Read More German Lit in 2020. This will be my 9th German. I'm looking to do 12. Next month I've got a buddy read with Lukács of Totally Pretentious, where we're doing Kafka's letters to Milena, one of his girlfriends. So that will be book 10 of German. But I'm delighted. This will also be my bath reading because it's so sort of short segments. I should be reading this in the bath. But don't think that means I devalue anything that rates as a bath read. That doesn't mean it has no value or lesser value. It absolutely does. The next one I saw on Eric Carl Anderson on a haul he did this week. Chuck Palahniuk, The Invention of Sound. Now, like Eric, I've never read any Chuck Palahniuk. He just hasn't sort of really interested me, but what Eric said this was about really intrigued me. So I'm not quite sure where the murder is involved, but one of the characters is someone who records screams for movie soundtracks. And the screams that this person records are real screams. You know, they're not actually screams. You know, they've obviously come about in terrifying circumstances. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. And I guess that'll be my introduction to Palahniuk. Next, Break, Butler and Vanessa Place. This is called One. And it's assembled by Christopher Higgs, because this is a collaboration, but I don't think it's a standard collaboration between Butler and Place. I don't know if it's that they are at each other with the bits they write, or they are deliberately trying to undermine what the other one's written, or take it, you know, somewhere that has minimally no connection with what the other one. I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm looking forward to it. And obviously this assembled by Christopher Higgs, I guess he was the arbiter and the peacemaker between the two of them. So I'm not sure I'm going to get to this year, because I've read my Blake Butler for this year, which was Alice Knott, and it's so fine. I just want to sit with that for the rest of the year. So I'll probably read that next year. Then some non-fiction, Between the Word and the World by Anna Macdonald. The publishing house is Splice. This is their living essays. I'm just going to read you the blurb on the back. Is it possible for an experience of literature to be an experience of life? Can we think of words as existing in 3 dimensions, as things we move through, in much the same way that we move through the world? And how can we account for their effects beyond the page as we carry them with us, in our bodies, in ourselves, holding on to them over the course of our years? So that sounds right up my street, so I'm really looking forward to that. And also from Spice, I ordered Anna Macdonald's debut novel called A Jealous Tide. I'm not going to read the blurb on this. It came out, also this year. Okay. I'm not familiar with Anna Macdonald, but looking at her, you know, what she has written, I thought that she was mainly a non-fiction writer. So it will be interesting to see what her fiction is like. And given what this sounds like, which is absolutely amazing, this could well be in my wheelhouse. So there you have it. Thanks very much for watching. Till next time.